More breaking news on the war in Iran. President Trump now shifting focus to oil no longer flowing through the Strait of Hormuz. Today, he said many countries will send warships to keep the strait open and safe. Hours earlier, he announced bombings on an oil hub in Iran while threatening to wipe out oil infrastructure there if Iran does anything to interfere with ship traffic. Joining me now, Charlie Savage, Washington correspondent with the New York Times, and John Brennan, former CIA director and MS Now national security and intelligence analyst. Gentlemen, welcome to you both. So, John, the White House has been taking heat for poor planning that led to the strait being closed and sparking this historic oil supply disruption. Is this an intelligence failure, or is it a lack of understanding of the consequences by administration officials?
Well, I think this war is a war of choice. And so it clearly falls on the policymakers and clearly in Donald Trump's lap. I don't think it's an intelligence failure because there have been a number of reports that indicate that the intelligence community and the CIA said that a campaign, a military operations would not be able to topple the regime. And so my former colleagues at CIA and throughout the intelligence community, I think, well know that there would have been a lot of repercussions as a result of a massive aerial bombing campaign that the U.S. and Israel carried out, including on the energy oil front. And the Strait of Hormuz is always something that the West and the United States has been worried about in terms of what Iran could do in the event of all-out hostilities. So, no, I don't think this is an intelligence failure at all. I do think it clearly is a failure on the part of the White House and Donald Trump in particular to understand just how complicated and complex issue this is, and that a military campaign against Iran is not going to lead to the collapse of the regime. And we're only into this in 2 weeks, but the Iranians have shown that they're going to continue to be defiant, including when it comes to the Straits.
John, adding to that, on another front, the president seems to have done a 180 on regime change, suggesting on a radio show yesterday that Iranian citizens don't have the capacity to effect regime change since they have no weapons and face well-armed remaining Iranian security officials. Was that not part of the intelligence calculation beforehand? Because Trump made it sound easy once the U.S. military finished its job.
Trump makes a lot of things sound easy. I think he also greatly misrepresents the facts. And again, I do think the intelligence was clearly there, that the Iranians were going to continue to try to resist and be defiant in terms of the face of this very determined U.S. military campaign that's been carried out, extensively throughout the country. But I do think that the 180s that Donald Trump has done continuously, I think, demonstrates that the rationale for this war was not there. The objectives clearly keep moving, and he doesn't really know which way to go at this point. And I think he's throwing things out. And it's unfortunate that we have now engaged in this type of conflict that really has had devastating impact, not just on Iran and the Gulf, but also in Lebanon, Israel, and other places. And it's roiling the global economy and the oil markets. And so, again, I think Donald Trump, privately, I think he realizes he's in a bit of a mess and he doesn't know how to get out. And that's why I think he's throwing stuff against the wall.
Charlie, speaking of the military, you wrote about Defense Secretary Hegseth's language about maximum engagement coming under scrutiny after the girls' school in Iran was hit by deadly strikes. Preliminary investigations indicate the U.S. was at fault. Why is his language on the war critical? Can he be called to account for it in some way?
Right. So what we're talking about here is the rules of engagement, which is what are there limits intended to protect civilians in warfare. And they are things like, what does an operator, a soldier, a pilot, someone controlling a ballistic missile, what do they need to know, see, and understand about the target before they're allowed to open fire? And there can be more permissive rules of engagement, or there can be more strict rules of engagement. And Hegseth has built his political identity around disparaging strict rules of engagement, stupid rules of engagement, call it woke and politically correct. It comes out of his experience as a mid-level infantry officer in Iraq during the Iraq War, when during the counterinsurgency phase, commanders had imposed higher rules of engagement because they were trying to prevent civilian casualties that would lead to the local population not cooperating. And he saw that as endangering his platoon. And so during this war in Iran, he has been boasting over and over again, this is not just something off the cuff, that he dialed up the authorities to engage to the maximum, that there are minimal rules of engagement at this point, and that the rules are designed to unleash American power, not shackle it. And so the question is, now that we see that there was apparently a terrible mistake in the United States. Someone put the coordinates of a school building into a Tomahawk missile, a school building that had used to be on a military base, but then was converted around a decade ago to civilian use, and did not double check, apparently, that it was still part of a military facility. And, over 100 children apparently have been killed. So that raises the question. There's always mistakes in war, unfortunately, but was the rules of engagement that Hegseth says he imposed a factor here? This has to be part of what an investigation, if there's a real investigation, would be looking at. Were the rules actually changed, or was he just saying this in some bombastic way? Even if the rules were not changed, did his repeated statements before and after all this happened affect the culture of the Pentagon in terms of a more permissive, rushed, less double-checking kind of approach to reviewing proposed targets? So Hegseth is a very different Secretary of Defense. Most military leaders in wartime in the United States go out of their way to talk about protecting civilians and express regret, and are really, you can criticize maybe they're not doing enough, maybe it's hypocritical. He's way in the other direction, and so that's what this article and this interest is about.
Charlie, Hegseth's politically influenced approach to all of this, does it fly with the military leaders who he oversees and has to work with in the Pentagon?
You hear, dating back to last year, when they were doing preparations for what became the boat strikes operation of attacking boats coming out of South America suspected of carrying cocaine, rather than interdicting and arresting them, that the Trump administration political officials coming out of the White House, with whom Hegseth is very much aligned, wanted much more, a much wider aperture, and that the Joint Chiefs who were allowed into the meeting, a lot of the regular lawyers and career officials were kept out of those planning sessions, but the Joint Chiefs were in, and they were pushing back and looking for more restrictive rules of engagement. So that I would not be at all surprised if something similar here was the case, but I don't have reporting at this point about that yet.
John, how damaging is this approach with respect to the attitudes towards the U.S.? As Charlie was pointing out in his article, this stokes anti-American sentiment, and winning hearts and minds is the only thing that could achieve regime change.
Yeah, I think it has devastating effects. I think the U.S. reputation globally is in tatters compared to what our reputation used to be. And I fully agree with Charlie as far as this issue related to rules of engagement. The Trump administration doesn't seem, and Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump don't seem to incur these civilian casualties because they are so determined to win at any cost. Unfortunately, that's the same attitude that I think Bibi Netanyahu and a number of the Israeli military leaders also have. And so they're willing to allow there to be significant damage to civilian infrastructure and to civilians themselves because they believe that is the cost of war. But I think, again, it really does undermine the reputation of the United States because, at least in previous conflicts, and certainly recently, and when I was in the Obama administration, our rules of engagement were very, very strict. We were not able to take any counterterrorism strikes unless we had near certainty that no civilians would be casualties. That is not the case here. And as Charlie pointed out, Hegseth has derided rules of engagement that he claims are politically correct. He wants to win at all costs. He's like a platoon leader who's very aggressive, but also out of control in terms of making sure that they take the objective at all costs. And again, I think we're seeing this right now, which is why I think the people inside of Iran, even those that were sympathetic to the United States before, are now wondering exactly what we are doing and the cost that is being now put upon the Iranian people.
Okay, Charlie, thank you so much for joining me. John, please stay with me.